Rain lashed against the marble columns of the Whitmore estate, lightning cracking the night sky open. Inside, the grand hall echoed with hurried whispers as paramedics pushed through the mahogany doors, their boots slick with water. Vincent Whitmore, the blind billionaire, sat motionless on a velvet couch, his clouded eyes staring into an endless void. His frail hands gripped a cane, knuckles white, as if anchoring him to a world he could no longer see. "Sir, your new nurse has arrived," the butler said softly, his voice barely rising above the storm. Soft footsteps crossed the polished floor, hesitant yet steady. Then, a voice broke through the silence, gentle but sure, like a melody from a forgotten past. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore. My name is Clara. I'll be taking care of you from today." Vincent froze. His breath caught, sharp and shallow. That voice, the same warmth, the same cadence that once filled his study with laughter before tragedy stole it away. His fingers tightened around the cane, trembling. "Emily," he whispered, voice cracking into the dark. The young nurse faltered, her breath hitching. I'm sorry, sir. My name is Clara." But Vincent's lips curved into a faint, tearful smile. "No," he said, his voice barely audible. "I know that voice anywhere. Everyone in the room, paramedics, butler, maids, stood frozen, their eyes darting between the blind man and the young woman. The air grew thick, heavy with something unspoken. For a moment, no one moved. Then Vincent's cane slipped from his hand, clattering against the marble floor. And in that sound, something shifted, a spark of hope in a heart long buried in grief. Dear viewers, this is a story of loss, love, and the kind of miracle that only compassion can ignite. Stay with me, because what happens next will stir your soul and remind you that sometimes the people we meet are not strangers. They're echoes of the ones we've lost. Before we get into the story fully, let's begin with blessings. Dear Lord, I ask you to surround every person watching with peace, healing, and endless love. Amen. You are not just an audience. You are my family, the reason I push through on the hardest days. For those who are new here, welcome to the family. Please subscribe, say hello in the comments, and let's grow closer together. Each story I bring is my sacrifice and devotion. When you walk away early, it feels like my heart is left unheard. Please, stay with me through the journey until the very end. I love you always. Now, let us begin. The Whitmore mansion stood like a fortress carved from silence, its marble halls swallowing every sound. Footsteps echoed too loudly, voices carried too far, and even the soft clink of a teacup felt like a trespass. Servants glided through the rooms, their movements practiced and hushed, as if afraid to disturb the weight of the air. The chandeliers gleamed, the velvet curtains hung heavy, but the house was a shell, grand, cold, and achingly empty. Vincent Whitmore, once a titan whose ambition reshaped city skylines, now lived as a ghost within its walls. His world had crumbled long before his eyes failed him. 3 years ago, a drunk driver stole his daughter, Emily, in a single, shattering moment. She was 16, bright and fearless, with a laugh that could fill a room. A year later, glaucoma crept in like a thief, stripping away Vincent's sight until only darkness remained. Now, at 62, he sat in his study, surrounded by books he could no longer read and memories he could not escape. The staff knew better than to linger. His temper was sharp, his grief sharper. Maids polished silver in silence. The butler delivered reports in whispers, and every caregiver before Clara had fled driven away by his refusal to be pitied. But Clara was different. The 24-year-old nurse from the city clinic moved through the mansion with a quiet strength that didn't bend under Vincent's bitterness. Her laughter was soft, like a breeze through open windows, and her kindness came without the weight of condescension. When she scolded him for skipping meals, or teased him for pretending he didn't need her help, it wasn't pity, it was care. For the first time in years, Vincent felt a flicker of something stir inside him, like a candle struggling to stay lit in a storm. The mansion's dining hall was a cathedral of excess. Marble floors, a mahogany table long enough for 20, and a crystal chandelier that caught the candlelight like stars trapped in glass. Vincent sat at the head, his hands folded, his face turned toward the darkness only he could see. Clara placed a plate of roasted chicken and vegetables before him, the faint scent of rosemary cutting through the room's stillness. "You didn't eat lunch, sir," she said, her voice firm but warm. "If you keep refusing meals, I'll call the doctor myself." Vincent's head tilted slightly, his cloudy eyes narrowing. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Not since Emily used to roll her eyes and tell him to stop working so late. The memory stung, but it was softer this time, like a bruise that no longer ached at every touch. "You're bold for a nurse," he said, his voice low, testing her. Clara didn't flinch. "I'm not here to watch you waste away, Mr. Whitmore. Eat, please." A faint smile tugged at his lips, so brief it might have been a trick of the light. He reached for the fork, his movements slow but deliberate, and took a bite. The room was silent save for the soft clink of silver against porcelain. Clara stood nearby, her hands clasped, watching him with a curiosity that went beyond duty. Who was this man, she wondered, who lived in a palace but seemed so utterly alone? In the quiet, Vincent's mind drifted. He saw Emily, 8 years old, her small hands fumbling over the piano keys in this very mansion. He'd sit beside her on the bench, guiding her fingers through the notes of Claire de Lune. Her laughter would bubble up when she missed a chord, bright and unself-conscious, filling the room with warmth. "You're terrible at this, Daddy," she'd tease, and he'd laugh, the sound echoing off the walls. That same room was now a tomb, the piano untouched, its keys gathering dust. "When she died," Vincent murmured, almost to himself, "the light went with her." Clara paused, her hands stilling. She didn't speak, but her silence was attentive, inviting him to continue. He didn't. Instead, he pushed the plate away, though half the food was gone. A small victory she didn't comment on. She cleared the table, humming softly as she worked, a tune so familiar it made Vincent's chest tighten. It was one of Emily's favorites, a lullaby she'd begged him to play at bedtime. He didn't ask Clara how she knew it. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. As the days passed, Clara's presence became a quiet rhythm in the mansion. She arrived each morning, her footsteps light but sure, and guided Vincent through routines he'd long resisted. She read to him from novels Emily had loved, dog-eared copies of And of Green Gables and The Secret Garden, her voice painting worlds he could no longer see. When she described the garden outside, her words were vivid. "The roses are blooming today, sir, red as a summer sunset." Vincent would listen, his head tilted, letting her voice pull him from the darkness for just a moment. The staff noticed the change. The butler, Thomas, raised an eyebrow when Vincent didn't snap at Clara for adjusting his pillows. A maid whispered to another that the master had asked for his tea hotter than usual, something he hadn't cared about in months. Clara didn't push him to talk about Emily. but her presence seemed to coax the memories out, soft and unforced. She was curious about the man behind the wealth, the one who sat in silence but flinched at certain sounds. A creaking floorboard, a distant laugh, like they carried ghosts. One evening, as Clara helped him to his room, Vincent paused at the staircase. "Why do you stay?" he asked, his voice rough but genuine. "I'm not an easy man to care for." Clara smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Because you're not as hard to care for as you think, sir. And someone's got to make sure you eat your vegetables." He chuckled, a sound so foreign it startled them both. For a moment, the mansion didn't feel so hollow. Clara guided him up the stairs, her hand steady under his arm, and the house seemed to breathe a little easier. That night, Vincent dreamed of Emily. She stood in the garden, her hair catching the sunlight, calling his name. "Daddy," she said, her voice clear and bright, the way it had been before the accident. But this time, the dream didn't end in pain. There was no screech of tires, no hospital lights, no cold hand slipping from his. Instead, Emily smiled, her eyes full of something gentle, something forgiving. Vincent woke with tears on his cheeks, but they weren't bitter. For the first time in years, the memory of his daughter felt peaceful, like a melody that lingered instead of fading. The mansion was still a house without light, but Clara's presence was a spark, a small, stubborn flame that refused to go out. And Vincent, though he couldn't see it, felt its warmth creeping into the corners of his world. Clara's voice, her steady steps, her unyielding care, they were like ripples on a still pond, spreading warmth where only cold had lingered. That night, as Vincent woke from a dream of Emily's gentle smile, he felt something new, a fragile peace, like a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. Clara arrived at dusk, as she did every evening, her footsteps a soft rhythm against the marble floors. "Time for the garden, Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying a brightness that didn't demand reciprocation. Vincent nodded, his cane tapping lightly as she guided him through the French doors to the sprawling garden beyond. The air was cool, laced with the scent of damp earth and blooming roses. Clara's hand rested lightly under his elbow, steady but unobtrusive, as they settled on a stone bench beneath a willow tree. "The sky tonight," she began, her voice painting the world he could no longer see. "It's like melted peach jam, sir, with streaks of gold spilling across it. There's a bit of lavender at the edges, like someone brushed it on with a feather." Vincent tilted his head, his sightless eyes turned upward, as if he could catch the colors in her words. He called it listening to color. Her descriptions so vivid they felt like light breaking through his darkness. "Peach jam," he murmured, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Emily would have liked that. Clara's laughter was soft, like wind chimes in the distance. She had good taste then, she said, and though Vincent couldn't see her face, he heard the warmth in her tone. They sat in silence for a moment, the garden alive with the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a night bird. Clara's presence didn't fill the emptiness left by Emily, but it softened its edges, made it bearable. For the first time in years, Vincent felt the breeze on his face, not as a reminder of what he'd lost, but as a sensation he could still hold. Back inside, Clara began a new ritual, reading aloud from Emily's favorite novels. She'd found them on the study's shelves, their pages worn from a young girl's eager hands. That evening, she chose The Secret Garden, her voice steady and clear as she read of Mary Lennox and her hidden paradise. Vincent sat in his armchair, his hands folded, listening not just to the story, but to the rhythm of Clara's voice, its rises and falls, its gentle pauses. It was a comfort, like a heartbeat he hadn't known he needed. When she reached a passage about the garden blooming, he spoke softly. Emily used to read that part over and over. She said it made her feel alive. Clara paused, her finger marking the page. "It's a good book for that," she said, her voice quieter now, as if guarding something fragile. She resumed reading, and Vincent let her words carry him, not to the past, but to a present where he could still feel connected to his daughter. One night, after dinner, Clara wandered to the dusty piano in the study. The instrument had sat untouched since Emily's death, its keys a silent monument to her absence. Clara's fingers brushed the ivory, hesitant at first, then pressed down, coaxing out the first notes of Clair de Lune. The melody drifted through the room, soft and halting, as if the piano itself were waking from a long sleep. Vincent, seated nearby, stiffened, his breath catching. "You sound just like Emily when she practiced that piece," he whispered, his voice thick with memory. "Even the mistakes are the same." Clara's fingers froze mid-key. She turned her head, hoping the dim light hid the tears welling in her eyes. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling but steady. "That's a lovely thing to say, sir," she said softly, though the words barely masked the ache in her chest. She didn't know why the comparison stirred her so deeply. Perhaps it was the weight of being someone's echo, or the fear that she could never live up to it. But she played on, letting the music bridge the silence between them. From that moment, their connection became something sacred, not romantic, but deeply familial, like a father and daughter finding each other across a chasm of loss. Clara didn't push Vincent to speak of Emily, but she listened when he did, her presence a quiet invitation to remember without pain. She teased him when he refused his evening tea, saying, "If you don't drink it, I'll hide your cane, sir." He'd scoff, but the corners of his mouth would lift, betraying a warmth he hadn't felt in years. The staff noticed the change, their whispers growing bolder in the kitchen. Thomas, the butler, watched in quiet astonishment as Vincent asked for a second helping of soup, a request unheard of in the mansion's hollow years. A maid caught Clara humming as she dusted the study, and Vincent, instead of retreating, tilted his head to listen. "She's different," the cook murmured to Thomas one evening, watching Clara guide Vincent back from the garden. "He's not the same man." That night, as Clara tucked a blanket over Vincent's shoulders in his study, he reached for her hand. His touch was tentative, as if afraid to break the moment. "You don't know what you're doing for me, Clara," he said, his voice rough but earnest. "You're bringing her back." Clara's breath hitched, but she squeezed his hand gently. "I'm just here to help, sir," she said, though her heart swelled with something deeper, a sense of purpose, of being needed in a way she'd never expected. As she left the room, the staff gathered in the hall, their eyes wide with disbelief. Vincent Whitmore, the blind billionaire who'd lived in shadows, was smiling again, a small, fragile smile, but a smile nonetheless. It was as if Clara's voice, her care, her quiet strength had begun to paint the mansion with colors no one could see, but everyone could feel. The house was still vast, still heavy with grief, but now it held something else. A spark of life, kindled by a nurse who spoke in the sound of color. The flicker of life she'd brought to Vincent's darkened world had sparked something new in him, curiosity. Who was this young woman who spoke in colors and played melodies that echoed his lost daughter? Her laughter, her gentle scolding, the way she moved through his home with quiet purpose. It stirred questions he hadn't asked in years. Vincent Whitmore, the blind billionaire who'd once commanded boardrooms, now found himself wondering about the heart of the nurse who'd begun to thaw his grief. Late one evening, as the fire crackled in the study, Vincent called for Thomas, his butler. The old man's voice was low, almost conspiratorial, as he leaned forward in his armchair. "Thomas," he said, his fingers tracing the carved wood of his cane, "tell me about Clara. Where did she come from? What do we know?" Thomas hesitated, his loyalty to Vincent warring with the unease of prying into the life of the woman who'd brought light back to the estate. But he nodded, promising to look into it discreetly. Days passed, and Clara continued her routines, unaware of the quiet investigation. She guided Vincent to the garden each evening, describing the sky with her vivid poetry. "It's all crimson tonight, sir, like a velvet curtain catching fire." She read from the secret garden, her voice weaving hope into the words, and played soft notes on the piano, each melody a bridge between Vincent's past and present. But beneath her steady care, there was a tension, a guardedness in her pauses, a flicker of worry when she thought no one noticed. Thomas returned with a report, delivered in hushed tones as Vincent sat by the study's fireplace. The truth was a shock, sharp and unexpected. Clara wasn't a licensed nurse from the city clinic, as her resume claimed. She'd been expelled from nursing school 2 years prior, unable to pay tuition after her mother's diagnosis with kidney failure. To keep her mother alive, Clara worked night shifts at a diner, scrubbing tables and serving coffee to strangers, her dreams of a medical career buried under hospital bills. The job at the Whitmore estate was a desperate gamble, a lie born of necessity. Vincent listened in silence, his clouded eyes fixed on nothing. The fire's warmth did little to ease the weight of the revelation. He asked Thomas to bring Clara to him. When she entered, her footsteps were slower than usual, as if she sensed the shift in the air. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with a tremor. Vincent's hands tightened around his cane. "Clara," he said, his tone calm but firm, "why didn't you tell me you're not a nurse?" The room fell silent, save for the faint crackle of the fire. Clara's breath hitched, and she took a step back, her hands twisting together. I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I lied to get this job. I needed the money. My mother, she's dying. Kidney failure. I work nights at a diner, but it's not enough for her treatment. I swear, sir, I never lied about how much I care for you." Her words hung in the air, raw and trembling. Vincent could hear the tears in her voice, the weight of her fear. He leaned back, his face unreadable, and for a moment Clara braced for anger, for dismissal. But then he spoke, his voice soft, almost tender. "You remind me of Emily," he said. "Not because you sound like her, but because she lied to protect people too. Once, she hid a stray cat in her room for weeks, sneaking food from the kitchen because she thought I'd send it away. She'd do anything for what she loved." Clara's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. Tears slipped through her fingers, silent but heavy. Vincent continued, his voice steady. "I'm not angry, Clara. I understand why you did it, and I'm not letting you go." He paused, then added, "From today, your pay is doubled. Send half to your mother's hospital. No arguments." Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir, I can't accept that," she stammered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've already been so kind." "You'll accept it," Vincent said, a faint smile breaking through his stern tone. "Because I'm not asking, I'm telling you. For the first time in years, His words carried the old authority of the man who'd built empires, but now it was softened by something deeper, empathy born of shared loss. Clara wept openly now, her shoulders shaking. It was the first time anyone had shown her kindness in years, the first time someone had seen her not as a failure or a liar, but as a daughter fighting for her mother. She tried to speak, to thank him, but the words dissolved into sobs. Vincent didn't press her. He simply listened, letting her tears fill the silence he'd once feared. The staff, lingering outside the study, exchanged glances. Thomas, his usual stoicism softened, whispered to a maid, "He's different with her. Like he's waking up." The news of Vincent's decision spread through the mansion like a ripple, stirring awe and disbelief. The billionaire who'd turned away the world was opening his heart, not to wealth or power, but to a young woman's truth. That night, alone in his study, Vincent reached into his pocket and pulled out Emily's locket, its silver surface cool against his fingers. He traced its edges, the familiar weight grounding him in the dark. "Maybe this is how she forgives me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the fire's soft crackle. For years, he'd carried the guilt of surviving when Emily hadn't, of failing to save her. But Clara's lie, her desperate act of love, felt like a message, a chance to heal not just her mother, but himself. The mansion was still a fortress of silence, but its walls no longer felt like a tomb. Clara's presence, her honesty, her tears, they were stitching together the fragments of Vincent's broken world. And as he held the locket, he felt something shift inside him, a step toward a life he thought he'd lost forever. Vincent's heart, newly stirred by empathy for Clara's desperate lie, felt lighter, as if the weight of years was beginning to lift. Her presence had become a beacon, guiding him through the darkness of his grief and blindness. The doubled salary, the care he'd extended to her mother's treatment, it was a bridge he hadn't known he could build. Yet, in the stillness of the mansion, something deeper waited to be uncovered, a thread of fate that would weave their lives even closer. Clara moved through her morning duties with her usual care, her hands steady as she dusted the study's shelves. The room was a reliquary of Vincent's past, books untouched since Emily's death, a piano silent but for Clara's recent melodies, and a desk cluttered with papers and forgotten trinkets. Her cloth paused over a small, framed photograph half hidden behind a stack of leather-bound journals. She lifted it gently, her breath catching as she saw the image. A young woman, no older than 20, holding a violin with a shy smile, standing beside a younger Vincent, his face alight with pride. The woman's eyes, her dark hair pulled into a neat bun. Clara's heart skipped. It was her mother, Lillian Dawson. Her hands trembled as she turned the photograph over. Scrawled on the back, in a delicate hand, was an inscription. "To Vincent, for believing in me when no one else did. Lillian." Clara's chest tightened, a flood of memories rushing in. Her mother's stories of playing music for grand events, her wistful mentions of a kind man who'd given her a chance. Lillian had never named him, but now the pieces fell into place. Clara clutched the photograph, her mind racing. How had her mother known Vincent? And why had she never spoken of him directly? That evening, after guiding Vincent to the garden and describing a sky like a sapphire quilt stitched with silver, Clara hesitated. The photograph weighed heavy in her pocket, its edges pressing against her heart. As they returned to the study, the fire casting soft shadows across the room, she gathered her courage. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, her voice softer than usual, "did you ever know a woman named Lillian Dawson?" Vincent went still, his hands pausing on his cane. The firelight flickered across his face, illuminating the sudden tension in his jaw. "Lillian," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The pianist? She used to play at my gallery events years ago. Her music, it was like Emily's laughter, full of life. She disappeared after my daughter died. I tried to find her, but—" His voice trailed off, thick with memory. Clara's throat tightened. She pulled the photograph from her pocket, though she knew he couldn't see it. "She's my mother," she said, the words trembling in the air. "Lillian Dawson is my mother." The silence that followed was profound, as if the mansion itself held its breath. Vincent's clouded eyes widened, searching the darkness for something he couldn't name. His hands shook, and a single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. "Your mother," he repeated, his voice breaking. "After all these years, life brings her daughter back to me." Clara's own tears fell now, silent but heavy. She stepped closer, placing the photograph on the desk between them. "She never told me much," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Only that she once knew a kind man who believed in her. She said he was the best person she'd ever met." Vincent's lips parted, and he turned his face away, as if to hide the raw emotions spilling over. "Lillian was special," he said. "She played at my galleries when no one else would give her a stage. She was young, poor, but so talented. After Emily died, she came to the funeral, left flowers. Then she was gone. I thought I'd failed her too." Clara shook her head, though he couldn't see. "You didn't fail her, sir. She always spoke of you with gratitude. Life got hard. After my brother died, she stopped playing music. Then the illness came." Her voice faltered, but she pressed on. "I think she wanted to protect you from her pain." Vincent reached out, his hand finding hers. His touch was gentle, trembling, like a father reaching for a memory. "You're her daughter," he said, his voice thick with wonder. "And you're here, caring for me. It's like Emily's come back, in spirit, through you." The words settled into Clara's heart, heavy with meaning. She squeezed his hand, her tears falling freely now. The connection between them, already sacred, deepened into something unbreakable. A bond forged not just by shared grief, but by a past that had intertwined their lives long before they met. The study, once a mausoleum of loss, felt alive with the weight of their shared history. The staff, lingering in the hall, caught fragments of the conversation. Thomas, the butler, stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. A maid whispered, "It's like fate, isn't it?" Her mother and his daughter. The mansion, so long a place of silence, hummed with a new energy, as if the walls themselves were listening to the unfolding of this miracle. Vincent's fingers traced the locket in his pocket, the one Emily had worn until her last day. He didn't speak of it, but its presence grounded him, a reminder of the daughter who seemed to linger in Clara's voice, her kindness, her strength. For the first time, he felt not just peace, but purpose, a chance to honor Emily by helping the daughter of a woman he'd once lifted up. But what none of them knew was that another tragedy was about to test their newfound bond. In the quiet of the night, as the fire burned low and Clara's footsteps faded down the hall, the mansion held its breath, waiting for the next turn of fate. The revelation that her mother, Lillian Dawson, had once been a part of his world, a pianist whose music had touched his life, wove their bond tighter, like a thread of fate stitching together broken pieces. Vincent felt Emily's presence in Clara's care, her voice, her quiet strength, and for the first time in years, he dared to believe in something beyond grief. But the mansion's newfound warmth was about to be tested, as fate prepared to challenge the fragile light they'd found. One morning, Clara didn't arrive. The clock in the grand hall ticked past her usual time, its rhythm a stark contrast to the stillness of the house. Vincent sat in his study, his cane resting across his knees, his clouded eyes turned toward the window he could no longer see. The servants moved cautiously, their whispers tinged with worry. Thomas, the butler, searched Clara's small quarters at the edge of the estate and found a note on her nightstand, written in her careful hand. "Mother's in the hospital. I'll return soon." Vincent's fingers tightened around his cane when Thomas read the note aloud. "No word since?" he asked, his voice low but sharp with unease. Thomas shook his head, though Vincent couldn't see it. "Nothing, sir. It's been 2 days." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint creak of the mansion's ancient floors. Vincent stood, his movements slow but deliberate, and began to pace the study, his cane tapping a restless rhythm. Each step echoed his growing agitation, a restlessness born of fear. Not for himself, but for Clara, the young woman who'd become his lifeline. Days stretched on, each one heavier than the last. The staff watched Vincent closely, noting the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was near, the way he paused at the sound of footsteps, hoping they were hers. On the 4th day, as rain battered the estate, Vincent stopped pacing and turned to Thomas. "Take me to her," he said, his voice firm, carrying the weight of a decision made without hesitation. The butler froze. "Sir, you haven't left the estate in years." "The hospital, it's chaotic, crowded. Your condition." "I'm blind, Thomas, not helpless," Vincent snapped, though his tone softened as he continued. "Clara needs me. I won't sit here while she's suffering." The staff exchanged glances, their protests stifled by the resolve in his voice. A maid whispered to another, "He's never done this. Not for anyone." Within the hour, Vincent was in the back of his old Bentley, guided by his driver and his cane, heading toward the public hospital downtown, a place as foreign to him as the world he'd once ruled. The hospital was a cacophony of beeps, voices, and hurried footsteps, a stark contrast to the mansion's silence. Vincent navigated the crowded halls, his cane tapping against the linoleum, his driver guiding him gently through the chaos. Nurses and patients stared as the blind billionaire moved forward, his tailored coat out of place among the worn scrubs and flickering fluorescent lights. He didn't care. His focus was singular, driven by a pull he couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. He found Clara in a dim corner of the ICU, sitting beside her mother's bed. The steady beep of a monitor punctuated her soft sobs. Lillian lay still, her face pale against the stark white sheets, tubes snaking from her arms. Clara didn't notice Vincent at first, her head bowed, her hands clutching her mother's. When his cane tapped closer, she looked up, her tear-streaked face paling with shock. "Mr. Whitmore," she gasped, rising to her feet. "You shouldn't have come." Vincent's expression softened, his clouded eyes turned toward her voice. "I can't see you, Clara," he said, his voice gentle but unwavering, "but I can feel your pain." He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the silver locket Emily had worn until her final day. He held it out, its chain glinting faintly in the hospital light. "My daughter wanted me to give this to someone who'd remind me what love feels like." "That's you." Clara's breath caught, her hands trembling as she took the locket. Its weight was slight, but its meaning was immense. A piece of Emily, the only tangible remnant Vincent had clung to through years of grief. She clutched it to her chest, her sobs breaking free, raw and unrestrained. This is too much," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's all you have of her." Vincent's lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. "No," he said softly. "I have you." The words hung between them, a vow of connection that transcended blood or time. Clara's tears fell harder, her fingers tracing the locket's intricate engravings, as if touching Emily's memory through it. The hospital room, with its sterile walls and beeping machines, seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them, bound by loss, love, and a shared past that felt like a miracle. The staff back at the mansion would later hear of Vincent's journey, their whispers filled with awe. Thomas, his stoicism shaken, murmured to a maid. He went for her. The man who wouldn't leave his study. In that crowded hospital room, Clara realized what Vincent had given her. Not just the locket, but the only piece of his daughter he still held. And in that moment, she knew she wasn't just a nurse to him, but a daughter in spirit, a light in his endless night. The hospital room, with its sterile walls and rhythmic beeps, held Clara and Vincent in a fragile moment of connection. Clara clutched Emily's locket, its silver weight a testament to Vincent's trust, his heart laid bare in a way she'd never expected. The bond between them, forged through grief, music, and a shared past with Lillian, felt like a miracle in itself. But the quiet of that moment was fleeting, a calm before a storm that would test the strength of their newfound family. Vincent, the blind billionaire who'd ventured into the chaos of a public hospital for Clara, stood on the edge of a decision that would change everything. The next morning, a doctor entered Lillian's room, his face grim. Clara sat by her mother's bedside, her hands still gripping the locket, as the doctor delivered the news. "Ms. Dawson's kidney is failing rapidly," he said, his voice clinical but heavy. "She needs a transplant immediately. Without a compatible donor, she has days, maybe a week." Clara's breath caught, her eyes darting to her mother's pale face. The tubes and monitors a cruel reminder of how little time remained. The doctor shook his head. "We've checked the registry. No matches so far." Clara's world tilted, the locket slipping from her fingers to the floor with a soft clink. She barely noticed, her mind racing with fear and helplessness. Vincent, standing quietly by the door, his cane steady in his hand, listened in silence. His clouded eyes betrayed no emotion, but his fingers tightened around the cane's handle, a subtle sign of the resolve forming within him. Without a word, he turned to the doctor. "Test me," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. The room froze. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "No," she said, her voice trembling as she stepped toward him. "Mr. Whitmore, you can't. You're blind, you're not young, you're fragile. Please, don't risk your life for us." Her words spilled out, raw and desperate, tears streaming down her face. The doctor hesitated, glancing between them, but Vincent raised a hand, silencing her protests. "Clara," he said softly, his voice steady as stone. "Emily gave her life once, in a moment I couldn't stop. Let me give mine meaning." His words carried a weight that silenced the room, a vow rooted in years of guilt and love. Clara shook her head, sobbing, but Vincent's expression remained resolute, his sightless gaze fixed as if he could see the path ahead. The hospital staff moved quickly, their skepticism outweighed by Vincent's insistence. Tests were run, blood drawn, and within hours, the results came back, a match, improbable but undeniable. Clara wept, torn between gratitude and terror, as Vincent was prepped for surgery. She stood by his side until the last moment, her hand gripping his. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. Vincent's lips curved into a faint smile. "I do," he said simply. "For Lillian. For Emily. For you." The orderlies wheeled him away, and Clara sank into a chair, clutching the locket, praying for a miracle she wasn't sure she deserved. Days later, the surgery was done. Lillian's vitals stabilized, her color returning as the new kidney took hold. Clara sat by her mother's bedside, watching her breathe easier, a fragile hope blooming in her chest. In a room down the hall, Vincent lay recovering, his body weakened but alive. When he woke, something felt different. Through the bandages over his eyes, faint flickers of light danced, blurred, fragmented, but undeniable. He blinked, disoriented, as if the world he'd lost was teasing him with its return. The doctors crowded around, their voices a mix of awe and confusion. "It's a neurological miracle," one said, scribbling notes. "Sometimes, extreme stress or surgery can trigger unexpected changes in the brain's visual pathways. We can't explain it fully." But Clara, standing by Vincent's bed, her face wet with tears, knew better. She leaned close, her voice a trembling whisper. "It's Emily," she said. "She's still watching over you." Vincent's breath caught, and he turned his head toward her voice, the faint light pulsing behind his bandages. A smile spread across his face, soft and radiant, as if he could feel his daughter's presence in the room. "Then she finally found her way back to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The words hung in the air, a quiet hymn to the love that had guided him through darkness. Clara clutched his hand, the locket still warm against her chest. The hospital room, with its sterile walls and beeping machines, seemed to fade, leaving only the bond between them. A father who'd lost everything, a daughter who'd found purpose, and a miracle that tied them to a past they both cherished. The staff, watching from the doorway, whispered in hushed tones, their eyes wide with disbelief. The blind billionaire, who'd lived in shadows for years, was not just alive but transformed, his heart open in a way none had thought possible. Vincent's smile lingered, directed toward the ceiling, as if he could see the light beyond the bandages. Not just the faint glow in his eyes, but the warmth of a love that had never truly left him. Clara's tears fell, not from grief, but from gratitude for the man who'd given her mother life and, in doing so, found his own. The Whitmore mansion, once a hollow monument to grief, had begun to breathe again, its marble halls softened by the miracle that had unfolded within them. Vincent's sacrifice, his kidney given to save Lillian, Clara's mother, had sparked something extraordinary. The faint flickers of light he'd sensed through his bandages were more than a medical anomaly. They were a testament to the bond he'd forged with Clara, a bridge to the daughter he'd lost. As weeks turned to months, Vincent's world, long shrouded in darkness, began to shimmer with possibility, and the mansion hummed with a warmth it hadn't known in years. Months after the surgery, Vincent's vision returned. Not fully, but enough to see blurred shapes, soft edges, and the glow of colors he'd forgotten. The doctors called it a neurological surprise, a rare rewiring of the brain they couldn't fully explain. But to Vincent, it was Emily's gift, a whisper from the daughter who'd never truly left him. He spent his days in the study, his cane still close but less necessary, as he adjusted to this fragile new sight. The world was hazy, like a painting left out in the rain, but it was beautiful, a miracle he hadn't dared to hope for. One quiet morning, as sunlight spilled through the study's windows, Vincent sat in his armchair, his hands folded, his heart steady. He turned to Thomas, the butler, who'd become more friend than servant in these transformative months. "Bring me Clara," Vincent said, his voice soft but urgent. "I want to see her clearly." Clara arrived, her footsteps hesitant as she crossed the polished floor. She wore her usual simple dress, her hair tied back, but her hands fidgeted, betraying her nerves. She stood before him, a blurred figure in the soft light, and Vincent leaned forward, his clouded eyes straining to focus. Slowly, her features came into view, her gentle smile, her dark eyes, the curve of her face. His breath caught, and tears welled, spilling down his cheeks. "You look just like she did," he said, his voice trembling with awe. "The day I lost her." Clara's eyes glistened, but she shook her head, stepping closer. "No, sir," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tears. "You didn't lose her. She just sent me to finish what she started." Her words hung in the air, a quiet truth that wrapped around them both. Vincent reached out, his hand finding hers, and for a moment, the study was no longer a place of loss, but a sanctuary of connection. Clara squeezed his hand, her own tears falling, and they stood in silence, bound by a love that transcended time and tragedy. The mansion's transformation was palpable. Where silence had once reigned, the halls now echoed with life. Clara played the piano again, her fingers coaxing Clair de Lune from the keys, the notes drifting through the house like a warm breeze. The staff, once cautious and hushed, laughed openly in the kitchen, their voices mingling with the clatter of dishes. One afternoon, Lillian arrived, her steps slow but steady, her recovery a testament to Vincent's sacrifice. She stood in the grand hall, her violin case in hand, her face radiant with gratitude. "Vincent," Lillian said, her voice thick with emotion as she faced the man who'd once given her a stage and now her life. "You saved 2 lives, mine and Clara's. I don't know how to thank you." She reached for his hand, her touch warm and familiar, and Vincent smiled, his blurred vision catching the outline of the woman he'd known so long ago. "You don't need to thank me," he said softly. "You brought Clara to me. That's more than enough." Lillian's visit became a turning point. She played her violin in the garden, the music weaving through the roses and willows, and Vincent listened, his heart full. Clara joined her, their laughter echoing as they shared stories of the past. Lillian's gallery days, Emily's love of music, the threads that had tied their lives together. The staff watched in quiet awe, Thomas wiping a tear as he murmured to a maid, "This house hasn't sounded like this since Miss Emily." The days that followed were filled with small miracles. Vincent walked the garden with Clara, her voice still painting the sky. "It's like a bowl of cherries today, sir, all red and gold." He chuckled, the sound lighter than it had been in years. The mansion, once a fortress of grief, was now a home, its walls alive with music and memory. Clara read to him from Emily's books, her voice a steady comfort, and Vincent began to speak of his daughter not with pain, but with joy, as if she was still there, smiling through Clara's care. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Vincent sat in the study, his hands resting on the locket he'd given to Clara. The world was still blurred, his vision a patchwork of light and shadow, but he felt whole in a way he hadn't since Emily's death. He tilted his head toward the window, the faint glow of dusk filtering through. "The world is bright again," he whispered, his voice soft but certain. even if my eyes are not. Clara, sitting nearby, looked up from her book, her smile soft. She didn't speak, but her presence was answer enough. The mansion, once a tomb of silence, now hummed with the music of their shared healing. A melody of compassion, forgiveness, and love that had brought Vincent back to life. And in that quiet moment, he knew Emily's light had never truly left. It had simply found a new home in Clara's heart. Vincent's partial vision, a blurred gift born from his sacrifice for Lillian, had reshaped his world, not just in what he could see, but in what he could feel. Clara, the young nurse who'd carried Emily's spirit into his life, had become more than a caregiver. She was family, a daughter in all but name. The mansion, alive with music and laughter, stood as a testament to their shared healing. But Vincent's journey wasn't complete. Not until he could give that light to others. 1 year later, the estate's sprawling lawn bloomed with possibility. A crowd gathered under a crisp autumn sky, their voices mingling with the rustle of leaves. At the center stood a newly built pavilion, its white columns gleaming in the sunlight. A banner fluttered above, the Emily Grace Foundation, named for Vincent's lost daughter and the woman who'd brought her spirit back. The foundation was Vincent's legacy, a promise to fund scholarships for poor nurses and medical care for patients in need. Clara, now its director, stood beside him, her simple dress replaced by a tailored suit, her eyes bright with purpose. Lillian, fully recovered, stood nearby, her smile radiant as she watched her daughter. Her violin rested in its case, a silent reminder of the music that had once connected her to Vincent. The crowd, nurses, doctors, families, and reporters, buzzed with anticipation as Vincent stepped forward, his cane tapping lightly, his blurred vision catching the glow of the day. Clara guided him to a ribbon stretched across the pavilion's entrance, her hand steady under his arm. The air was thick with hope, a tangible shift from the mansion's shadowed past. Vincent faced the crowd, his voice steady but warm, carrying the weight of a man reborn. "People say medicine healed me," he said, his clouded eyes scanning the blurred faces before him. "They point to the surgery, the doctors, the science. But it wasn't surgery that brought me back. It was compassion, the kind that money can't buy." He paused, his hand tightening around his cane as Clara squeezed his arm, her presence a quiet anchor. "This foundation is for Emily, for Clara, for every soul who's ever needed a hand to hold in the dark. It's my way of giving back what they gave me." The crowd erupted in applause, cameras flashing as Clara cut the ribbon, her hands trembling but sure. Reporters pressed forward, their questions drowned by the cheers, but Vincent's words lingered, a testament to the miracle that had unfolded. Clara stepped to the microphone, her voice clear and steady. "This foundation isn't just about money," she said. "It's about seeing people, really seeing them, for who they are and what they need. That's what Mr. Whitmore taught me." Her eyes met his, and though his vision was blurred, he saw her clearly, not just her face, but her heart. The ceremony continued with laughter and music, Lillian playing a soft melody on her violin as children ran across the lawn, their voices bright. Vincent stood at the edge of the pavilion, his cane grounded in the grass, his face turned toward the sunlight. Clara approached, guiding a young girl by the hand, a scholarship recipient, her eyes wide with wonder. Vincent's breath caught as he watched, the blurred image of Clara and the child echoing a memory. Emily, years ago, running across this same lawn, her laughter chasing the wind. His eyes welled, not with grief, but with gratitude. Lillian joined them, her violin now silent, her smile warm. "You've given us more than a second chance, Vincent," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given us a future." Vincent reached for her hand, his touch gentle, and for a moment, the three of them stood together, bound by a past that had shaped them and a present that healed them. The mansion, once a tomb of silence, was alive again. The piano in the study rang with Clara's melodies, the garden bloomed under her care, and the staff moved with a lightness they hadn't known in years. Thomas, the butler, watched from the sidelines, his stoic face softened by a rare smile. "It's a new house now," he murmured to a maid, who nodded, her eyes glistening. The Emily Grace Foundation wasn't just a legacy. It was a promise that the light Vincent and Clara had found would shine for others. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the lawn, Vincent whispered, almost to himself, "The world is bright again, even if my eyes are not." Clara overheard, her heart swelling, and she squeezed his arm, her silence speaking louder than words. The crowd began to disperse, but the warmth lingered, a reminder of what compassion could build. Sometimes, the people who enter our lives don't come to remind us of what we lost. They come to show us what we still have to give. The narrator's voice, soft and reflective, wove through the scene, carrying the weight of their journey. Blindness isn't losing sight. It's forgetting to see the good in others. And when Vincent met Clara, he opened his eyes again, not to the world, but to his heart. The closing image lingered. Vincent, cane in hand, standing in the sunlight, watching Clara guide the child across the lawn. It was a moment of full-circle redemption, a testament to hope, faith, and the renewal born of love. The mansion, the foundation, the family they'd become, all of it was proof that even in the darkest nights, compassion could light the way home. Hi, if this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story like this. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and what lesson did you learn from Clara's story today? Your comment might inspire someone else to listen with their heart, too.